So there's just not enough water for our current use. And as long as the population's growing, that'll become more severe. The dynamic at play, the derivative solution that people propose is sort of one of these anti-human degrowth plans where folks say, well, let's take 5-minute showers, 2-minute showers, low flush toilets. Instead of having grass on your lawn and like the classic American white picket fence, you can have a bunch of rocks. Less and less water consumption via quality of life reductions and economization. And there's a place for being efficient with natural resources. Like, I think that being a good steward of creation means not being wasteful. But the only solution people are offering in water is consuming less. And that seemed insane to me. If you're pro-growth, then that's not viable.
Howdy, everyone, and welcome back to Moment of Truth, the podcast of American Moment. My name is Nick Solheim. I am the CEO of American Moment, and it is great to be back with you this week. As always, we have a wonderful episode today with Augustus Doricko talking about weather modification in his company, Rainmaker. But before we get to that, I always got a flag. We have a bunch of cool stuff on the website at americanmoment.org. We have 4 academic programs that are running at any given time. If you are an intern or an entry-level staff member in DC and you'd like to be a part of those, or if you want to be an intern and want to get your first job in DC and you would like to be part of those, you can find out more information about all of our programs, see applications, see what we're all about on our website at americanmoment.org. Today we had on Augustus Doricko, who runs Rainmaker. We've been really blessed to be friends with Augustus for years. We were at the very early stages of him starting this project back when it was what seemed like a bunch of crazy plans, and now it's a reality. They're actually doing weather modification in several states. So we had a great conversation about what weather modification is, because I'm not a super technological guy. So we talked about that. We talked about the patchwork of regulations that govern this in different states, the difference between the West Coast and East Coast as it relates to governing water. And then we talked about how we can use water to reindustrialize America. So it was a truly fascinating conversation. I'm sure many of you have seen Augustus on X.com. You've seen pictures of his amazing mullet. We talk about all of those things. So we will go now to Augustus Doricko. Augustus, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Nick.
So you've got a more interesting story, I think, than most people that we have on this podcast. Really want to have an opportunity to dig into it a little bit and what you're doing now. So tell us about Augustus, the man with the mullet, around DC, around state legislatures across the country.
Yeah, the man with the mullet I am. In addition to that, I am the founder and CEO of Rainmaker. We're a next generation cloud seeding and weather modification company. So we fly drones into clouds that disperse a material that makes it rain and snow more for farms, reservoirs, utilities, cities, ecosystems at risk. And the primary innovation that Rainmaker has produced is not just drone-based weather modification, drone-based cloud seeding, but it's the ability to measure and attribute the precipitation from our intervention and differentiate that from naturally occurring precipitation. So historic cloud seeding operations, we can get into the details of that. They would kind of just blast stuff in the sky and then like give the thumbs up and say, we made it rain. Who knows how much, who knows whether it was man-made or not. Rainmaker can show you how much we produce from our operations. And our ultimate vision, my magnum opus, should I be able to in my life, is going to be turning the American Southwest from West Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and Southern California, green, lush, and arable.
So how did you get into all of this in the first place? Like, give us the story from like high school to now.
Yeah.
How did you get here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Stamford, Connecticut. Loved it there. I got to sail a lot, very New England waspy childhood activities. And then I wanted to study physics. And the reason why I wanted to study physics was because Neil deGrasse Tyson sort of tricked me into thinking that there was like moral philosophy in quantum. A little bit, not so much. There's this Heisenberg quote where he says, have you ever heard this? Where he says, when you take your first drink from the cup that is the natural sciences, you find atheism, but down at the bottom of the glass, there's God staring back at you.
No, I've not heard that. That's a great quote.
It's a great quote. Love it. So I wanted to study physics for that reason, with all of the pretension and hubris of an 18-year-old that thought he could like prove or disprove the existence of God. Foolish and vain endeavor. But the best physics program I got into was at UC Berkeley. So I went from Connecticut to UC Berkeley, and I sort of like to joke around and say that like I was very politically ambivalent, maybe a little bit bleeding heart when I was in Connecticut, and then Berkeley, because it shows you like the logical extension of what becomes of the world under certain policies, made me feel differently about those. Yeah. While I was studying physics at Berkeley, the pandemic happened. And so Berkeley was a mess. Texas was open. I moved from Berkeley to Texas because my grandmother lived there. And while I was in Texas, this is a very circuitous route to founding a weather modification company.
Yeah. I'm in for it, though. I'm in.
While I was in Texas, I was doing school online. I worked as a data scientist full-time, and I was a personal trainer at a gym. And of those three things, the most productive and useful was becoming the personal trainer because I met the biggest water well driller in Texas. So he took me under his wing. He was a great guy. He told me all about his industry, and we eventually stumbled into, or at least I stumbled into, co-founding a business with him. They used an IoT flow meter and some software that I wrote to do like TurboTax for groundwater. Like if you're a farmer, we would report to the government on how much groundwater you were using, handle all of your fees, penalties, documentation, that sort of stuff. And then my friends back at Berkeley were like, oh, you're a UC Berkeley student with a software company. You're supposed to drop out of college now. So that's what I did. Dropped out my senior year. And worked.
So wait, how much do you have left? Like if you were to go back, you have like 1 year left of classes to do.
So I would have had less than a year's worth of classes. However, I think I got an email middle of last year saying like, hey, you need to fill out this form in order to keep your credits valid. And I decided to burn the boats. And so I did not fill out that form. So I would need to reapply. And I don't know whether I would make it back into Berkeley at this point in time.
Yeah, there's no going back.
Yeah.
I've never gone back. So
I think the idea is that we ought to get like professor emeritus degrees from the university of our choosing, later when we've made it.
Yeah, wait until you get the honorary degree.
Exactly. And so I worked on that company, TerraSeco, for a few years, built that up, expanded it in the Midwest. It did well, not extraordinary outcome. And then I sold the business in March 2023. And I'd been working in water. And in working in water, in the United States, at least, you realize that there is one fundamental dynamic and one fundamental problem. And the problem is that there is not enough water to meet our current consumption and certainly not to account for any growth, right? Like Phoenix, Arizona is banning new housing development. St. George, Utah is banning new housing development. Salt Lake City has respiratory problems creeping up because the Great Salt Lake is going lower and lower from evaporative losses. The California state water supply strategy explicitly accounts for 1 million acres of farmland in the Central Valley turning into desert by 2035. So there's just not enough water for our current use. And as long as the population's growing, that'll become more severe. The dynamic at play, the derivative solution that people propose is sort of one of these anti-human degrowth plans where folks say, well, let's take 5-minute showers, 2-minute showers, low flush toilets. Instead of having grass on your lawn and like the classic American white picket fence, you can have a bunch of rocks. Less and less water consumption via quality of life reductions and economization. And there's a place for being efficient with natural resources. Like I think that being a good steward of creation means not being wasteful. But the only solution people are offering in water is consuming less. And that seemed insane to me. If you're pro-growth, then that's not viable. I looked into the technologies to produce more water, particularly where desalination's not an option, right? If you're in Nevada, non-starter. If you're in most of Arizona, Colorado, Utah, etc., non-starter.
Can you explain why that is?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry. So desalination, you take water from the coasts. You can push it through a membrane or boil it or do many other things to take the salt out of the water and make it fresh. But that fresh water is still on the coast. And if you want to pump that water into the interior of the country, right, even only into the Central Valley, if you have a desal plant in Los Angeles, you want it to go to the Central Valley. One, like the regulations right now with NEPA and with building codes are just insurmountable, right? And then the energy costs are still so high that that's a huge problem. For what it's worth, though, I think that those problems will be solved, right? I think that we will deregulate sufficiently to build more infrastructure for water. I think that we will produce cheaper energy. The problem is still conveyance costs. You need thousands of miles of pipes to get this stuff inland. And I don't mean like pipes in your house. I mean huge oil tanker sized pipes to get this water moving. That's going to cost you hundreds of billions of dollars, if not more, especially when you include the eminent domain that would be required to seize the land to build the desal pipeline. So if you're in Los Angeles, you can desalinate right on the coast. The water's right there. But if you're anywhere farther into the interior, very, very difficult to do large-scale desalination. So you need to produce water where people are, in the interior, not on the coast. How do you do that? Looked into multiple technologies, and I found out about something called cloud seeding. Many people either think that cloud seeding is a conspiracy or that they've heard about it in the past, but it never really became anything. Cloud seeding is fundamentally taking natural puffy clouds with lots of liquid in them that are not naturally precipitating and dispersing material into those clouds, safe materials, non-toxic ones, 10 times safer than aspirin. We can talk about that later. And dispersing material into those clouds that either freezes the droplets into bigger snowflakes that then fall, or that agglomerates the droplets into bigger droplets that fall. And so I found out about this tech. It seemed incredible. It was invented in the United States in the 1940s. Like GE has the first patent on it from 1946. We used it across the country in the 40s, 50s, 60s. There was something called Project Skywater, where we were trying to supply the Hoover Dam's water via cloud seeding. And so I was exhilarated when I first found out about it, because if you can make it rain or snow more, like that's life-changing.
Problem solved.
Yeah, exactly. Then I realized, though, well, if this technology had that much promise and it's not ubiquitous, then it must be fake, right? That was my second conclusion, because it came about, it was invented in the same time as rocketry and fission. But with rocketry, right, we have reliable Falcon 9 first stage launch and landing. So like we are going multiplanetary now. We will reach the heavens that way. We have Starship. With fission, we're finally getting NRC deregulation. There's dozens of SMR companies that will give us cheaper energy than we've ever had before. But cloud seeding and weather modification, this technology that was supposed to terraform the planet, right? Like this other sci-fi 60s, where's my flying car tech, it doesn't exist right now at any meaningful scale. And so I thought it was fake. And then, because I was still stubborn and so excited about the prospect of it potentially being real, I went to the Weather Modification Association conference.
Okay. That's a real thing that exists.
It is. Yeah. You would think, right, like Illuminati robes, Bohemian Grove. It was actually in Aurora, Colorado.
Okay.
Which is it's a fine area of Colorado. I prefer Boulder. But it was mostly, relatively old third rail academics that have been researching this stuff despite the scrutiny of their peers for years, right? This has been considered quackery for the last 60 years. What I was presented with at this conference changed everything for me and for this technology writ large. The Snowy experiment. This was something conducted by the National Center for Atmospheric Research and multiple American universities. What they realized was the fundamental problem in cloud seeding was attribution. If I fly a plane into a cloud and I sprinkle some magic beans and then it rains, you can't actually causally attribute that rain to my intervention, right? That cloud might have precipitated naturally. So how do you prove that it's working? And statistical evaluations where you say like, well, this target area rained more than this one, not so robust. Weather varies a lot. The error bars were huge. So their hypothesized solution was, if you take the right wavelength of radar, you should be able to see the freezing of the water into ice just in the track of your vehicle in the cloud. And then you should only see the precipitation in the track of your vehicle in the cloud. And not only did they see that, they were able to measure tens of millions of gallons of precipitation from each of their interventions. In this experiment, Snowy, was conducted in Idaho. Once I found out about that, once I found out that you could prove that it's working, and then a Swiss lab recapitulated that research in 2023, I was like, okay, let's do it. This is the way that you actually scale the technology. It's how you build trust with customers and like deliver on and prove the value prop. And so it was in spring of 2023, after I attended that conference, that I started Rainmaker Technology Corporation.
Yeah, and it's been sort of a meteoric rise, it feels like. I remember having this conversation with you very early on when it was just you and you were like sleeping in a warehouse and stuff. And now here you are, actually doing, I mean, your Twitter feed is a sight to behold. You're always doing some of the craziest stuff I've ever seen in my life. So I've got a million follow-up questions to that. I think the best place to start is here. What exactly, aside from attribution, stopped this technology from being successful before you started Rainmaker?
Yeah.
Like going back to the 40s.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So there are really 4 verticals that Rainmaker is pursuing in tandem that are trying to meet the problems of historic weather modification and cloud seeding. The first of which is attribution, right? It's the ability to actually measure what your effect is with the appropriate remote sensing. So Rainmaker, we build our own radar in-house. We are starting to work on our own LiDAR. We're starting to work on our own in-cloud probes. This is like, if you're an electrical engineer or an optical engineer and you heard me say this, like that sounds insane for an early stage company to do. It is a little insane. But anyway, we're building all of the hardware and the software to take these measurements for attribution. That's one. The second big problem historically has been just cost of operations. If you're flying a plane, that obviously costs more than a drone. And then not only is flying a plane no good because of cost, but also because in most of the Western US, where you need to cloud seed because you need more water, the clouds are in the immediate vicinity and altitude of the mountains. So no pilot wants to fly through a cloud where they can't see the mountaintop and then crash into the side of it. And that's happened multiple times in the history of weather mod. So you can't even get precise operations because pilots aren't willing to fly through these dangerous conditions by mountains. Drones, if they can withstand severe icing and severe weather, which ours can, then they're a much more viable means for delivering this material to altitude. Then there's the question of the material. Traditionally, people have used either silver iodide or dry ice. The reason why they use those compounds is their crystalline structure is similar to ice, so water will freeze onto them, grow into big snowflakes. Those snowflakes spread, become heavy enough to fall. So silver iodide, it's 10 times safer than aspirin. Its toxicity is about the same as salt, like table salt. We're using so little of it that it's in the parts per trillion in these watersheds after decades of operation. So that compound unto itself, totally safe for cloud seeding. But it only works at like -6 Celsius and below. That's like below 32 Fahrenheit.
And so basically, just to help me understand what it does, is it makes these water droplets heavier.
So those water droplets are too small to naturally fall. They're not big enough to fall.
Yep.
But because of some interesting vapor pressure stuff, if you have a silver iodide particle in there, the water will favorably freeze onto that. And then the water will continue to favorably freeze onto the ice over the water. So it'll sort of suck up all the droplets in its vicinity into a big enough ice crystal to fall. That's what it does. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so you only need about like as much as can fit in the palm of your hand to make this stuff work. The problem though is the stuff only works at very cold temperatures. If you can get something that works at a higher temperature, then you can freeze the liquid in more clouds, open up more geographies, open up more seasons. So there's the remote sensing to prove that it's working, the attribution. There's the drone-based delivery to solve for planes. There's alternative materials that we're looking into. We don't use any right now, but if you can get something that's even more biodegradable and safe and more effective, that'd be awesome, because then you could seed in Arizona where you currently can't. And the last thing is just weather modeling. Most, like, I don't know, look at a weather app, right? Forecasts are trash. If you now use machine learning, you can get better predictive power, but if you ground it in physics-based modeling, then you can get better understanding. We're trying to synthesize those two things just to get better models, because right now the models that people use are trash. So Rainmaker is building those 4 things in tandem.
So focusing in on the drone thing, are you guys using somebody else's drone? Please don't tell me you've built your own. Have you done modifications there? Like, how does this actually work? When you've got a drone up there.
So when I started Rainmaker, I thought, surely people talk about drones all the time. Surely the commercial drone market in the United States. He's going to
tell me he built his own drone.
If we have built our own drone. The spectacular engineers that we have on our team have built our own drone.
Yeah.
And not only have we built our own drone, we've built our own drone that's a Class 1 UAS, and it's the only Class 1 UAS in NATO capable of withstanding severe icing. So totally unintentionally developed, interesting capability for weather modification. Yeah.
Hey, by the way, DoD, would you like some of these?
It's just interesting that we developed that for a totally different path. But yeah, you need to be able to fly into these really cold clouds. So we had to develop an anti-icing system. And that was insane because for the first year or so of the company, we were buying all these different drones from different vendors. Most of them were liars. The ones that weren't liars were charging us crazy markups, and they didn't have anti-icing systems on them. So in September of 2024, we were just like, you know what? Screw this. Let's vertically integrate. And then just like that, turned around, and we're on our 5th generation drone right now.
By the way, September of 2024 was like 5 months ago.
Correct.
You've built your own drone in.
We're coming up against our 100th unit right now.
That might be one of the most insane things I've ever heard on this podcast. Like that is unreal.
You know, everything that we have accomplished is because of the spectacular team that we have and the grace of God. I'm very grateful for it.
Okay, so let's walk through, I think, some of the most interesting things that I see from you is when you're, on site actually doing this, whether you're doing, you're still doing a lot of like tests and that sort of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the, so what is, you show up, tell us what you are doing the entire time you're on site. Like give us the full
absolutely.
thing.
So if we'll pick a target area, if there's a given customer in a location, we'll do a climatology, which basically means we look back at all the historic weather data just to make sure that there are enough clouds to make this worth their while. Because if we go and there's no clouds and they're paying for something, then it's a non-starter, right? So we'll analyze historic data to make sure that everything's good. Then we are deploying an array of different kinds of sensors. We'll make some cool product announcements about these as well. But we deploy radar, LiDAR, aerosol probes, which are basically dust monitors, all throughout the target region so that we can measure what the cloud conditions are in those regions.
And these are like spread out. So you're like driving around in a truck and dropping these things
We're literally
off?
driving around in a truck. We have a field instrumentation specialist and some forward deployed engineers. They set these things up, either plug them into grid or have huge battery cells that they plug them into. And that's how we do our targeting. So then we'll use all of that radar and LiDAR data to find when there are clouds with super cooled liquid in them. Once we have detected those conditions, then we'll deploy our forward deployed engineers. Ideally, they're on site already because the forecast was accurate. They will launch what's called a sonde. Have you ever heard of a sonde? So it's basically a weather balloon with a bunch of different goofy atmospheric probes on it. And that can give you a very precise altitudinal profile of the conditions, highest density of supercooled liquid, all that kind of stuff. Once we have a very clear target altitude, we will deploy the drones. The drones fly up to that altitude. They will disperse the silver iodide, and then just continue operating until those conditions have dissipated. After the event, retroactively, we'll go back to the radar data. We'll model out where the aerosol plume goes, where the particle plume goes, and then measure the change in the radar and LiDAR fields just within the particle plume to attribute how much precipitation was induced from our intervention just in that area.
Yeah, that is, and then you just like pack it all up.
So the radar, the sensors stay out there because we'll operate for a full season, but the drones go in and out.
So yeah, that was going to be my next question is, say, you're a big agricultural operation.
Mm-hmm.
How frequently are you going to need? I suppose it depends on the region and the regularized weather. But how frequently do you need to fly a drone through in that case?
So, in some cases, I would say that the more interesting question is like, for how long might you have to fly a drone if there are conditions? Like we've had our 4 deployed engineers are soldiers. We're basically just we're hiring anybody that's capable, but oftentimes now that means former Marines, because these guys will have to be on like 72-hour shifts.
Yeah.
Because there's clouds above you the whole time. You got to keep operating until all that water is gone. On a given day and on a given month in Oregon, you might have a dozen operations. Those will go from anywhere between 6 and 24 hours. In the Central Valley, it's a little less frequent. In Utah, it's a little more frequent. That's the spread.
And I suppose one of the limiting factors to this is, the fact that there be cloud cover. What's sort of the plan going forward for regions where there may not be a lot of cloud cover?
So if I might take that question as an opportunity to clarify a little bit about what cloud seeding is, because you bring up the point like, well, there needs to be cloud cover. People bring up the creation of clouds often, right? Or the creation of long streaks in the sky that might appear to be clouds. They'll bring up solar radiation management, which is another one of these atmospheric intervention technologies. And so I would just like to make the point that, per your question, in order to cloud seed, you do need big, natural, fluffy clouds full of liquid water. If you see long streaks in the sky behind airplanes, that's not us. Those clouds can't be seeded, be they chemtrails or contrails or otherwise. It's just not relevant to cloud seeding. And also, cloud seeding is not solar radiation management or marine cloud brightening. Those two technologies are climate scale interventions where you spray aerosols at high altitudes in order to form clouds or in order to reflect more of the sunlight that hits the Earth to cool the planet down. Once again, not cloud seeding. We need these big fluffy clouds. Have you heard of solar radiation management, by the way?
You are the only person that would ever tell me about this.
All right. Yeah.
No.
Okay. So Harvard, the World Economic Forum, Gates, many similar parties are actively investigating and researching solar radiation management in order to cool the planet.
So that would be the creation of more cloud cover to reduce the amount of sunlight that hits the planet.
In the stratosphere, yes.
Okay. Seems bad. Seems like not a good... I like sunny days, man. I don't want to live in London.
As do I. And you know what? I don't mind rain either.
I hope not.
No, yeah. But I certainly don't want to accidentally freeze the planet.
Yeah.
So I think that technology ought to be pursued with great caution and regulatory scrutiny.
Yeah. So let's talk about the chemtrails thing. What in the popular conspiratorial conception are chemtrails, and why are you not doing them?
Yeah. Thank you. So, I've once you stare into the abyss, it stares back at you, right? Once you go deep into chemtrail Twitter, you learn a lot about chemtrail Twitter, and there are many competing theories. A lot of people suspect coal fly ash, which is this waste from coal plants, is being dispersed over us. A lot of people believe that aluminum is being dispersed over us. A lot of people conflate solar radiation management, which is usually done with sulfur dioxide and the spraying of like those long streaks in the sky, as chemtrails. They'll mix up SRM and chemtrails. That is what it is understood to be. It's understood to be a government conspiracy theory, or it's understood to be a government conspiracy to either cool the planet down and also poison the public, or just poison the public. There is not often explanation of the meteorological differences between contrails, which are naturally occurring, and chemtrails, other than people say like, well, the chemtrails, because the chemicals stay in the sky longer, like they never used to stay that long behind planes, and yes, they did. But I'm totally open-minded to data and evidence if presented with it. Like, it would not be, I think the thing that people don't do is sympathize enough with the credible claims that that community makes, which is like insane for me to be saying. But the United States did something called Operation Popeye in the Vietnam War, where we deliberately modified the weather over Vietnam to flood out the Ho Chi Minh Trail to impede Viet Cong logistics, right? The 54th Weather Reconnaissance Squadron's motto was make mud, not war. The United States government has done chemical weapons testing over the Midwest, particularly in Missouri, over Kansas City. Not cloud seeding or SRM or chemtrails, but like Agent Orange type stuff.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Can you say more about that?
This was
Agent Orange in Kansas City.
Yeah. This was
Say more.
this was back in the 19th century. But we were just checking how, the United States government was checking how effective it was. They particularly looked at populations that they didn't care about much at the time. I'm
definitely going to go down a Wikipedia rabbit hole about this.
Yeah,
later.
Absolutely. So all of that to say, I think it's very reasonable for people to be distrusting of our government and suspicious of its weather modification activities. But like cloud seeding just isn't that. Cloud seeding is not what people suspect these chemtrails to be. And so whether those chemtrails are real or not, I personally haven't found enough evidence to suggest that they are. It's a totally different animal. So if you want to ban chemtrails, by all means. But if you want to lump in cloud seeding in such a way that would deprive Americans from having enough water to continue to farm as they have, and then also not be competitive on a geopolitical scale because other countries are investing in this heavily, I think that would be very imprudent.
Yeah. So give us the sort of the regulatory view for Rainmaker, not just here in DC, but also in the States. My assumption would be that some state legislatures will think that this is chemtrail stuff. You've explained why it is not, but give us sort of the picture of where you can operate, where you can't, etc.
So something that and tell me if you've seen other instances of policy shakeouts like this, but I have been surprised to find it is not a Republican-Democrat debate. It's really not right-left at all. It is entirely east-west because the Western U.S. is desperate for water.
Yeah.
And so they are willing to try to... do you have a Zin, by the way? Is that can I ask about that on the pod?
Is that okay? Alp, actually?
Of course it is. Excuse me.
We got to get them to sponsor 9 milligram.
By the way, speaking of which, Mr. Carlson, the LD50 and toxicity of silver iodide is 6,000 times less than nicotine. And I still think this is great. That's the one point I'll make to the camera here.
Yeah, there you go. We're going to keep that in.
Great.
We're going to keep it in.
Okay. So yeah, the states that actually are desperate for water, right, that have been desperate for water, that have water wars and water policy in their culture from their founding, they all want this because they have looked into it very deeply. They're very familiar with the history of cloud seeding because they've made attempts to do it in the past. And now they're super excited to work with Rainmaker because we have this drone tech, this attribution tech, just much more lively organization than previous operations. And then in the East, where, say, like Florida, conventionally not thought of as a state that desperately needs more water, even though that's not the case. Like 14 million acres of the state is in drought right now. 30,000 acres just burned down from wildfire because it was that dry. But in the East, where people haven't needed as much water for as long, they haven't heard of cloud seeding. They're afraid of chemtrails. They just wholesale.
It sounds scary.
Yeah, it's totally. But the state of play now is in these Western states. We have very strict regulations to which we have to adhere. We can't just fly up and blast this stuff anywhere. We can't just use any material. We have to get permits in Texas from the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation. That means that we have to have a very specific program area. We have to have materials designated by the state as safe. We have to have a concept of operations that the state approves of. We have to have certified meteorologists from the American Meteorological Society doing the operation. And then we have to do reports on a monthly basis on the operation, how many times we flew, what the efficacy was, how much material we dispersed. And that's true of Utah and Idaho and Oregon and California and Nevada and Colorado and New Mexico. So it's really that whole Western bloc that has that permitting structure. And we advocate for that everywhere. Basically, all the eastern states are trying to ban it wholesale.
Yeah. So in these Western states, just to use this as an example, like every time you onboard a new customer, you have to go back, to the state government and say, hey, this is going to be our program area. Here's what we're going to be using. You have to do the permitting process over again.
Yeah. And you know what? Here's a crazy thing for like an El Segundo California tech guy to say, because we're typically, or like someone like us to be saying, because we're generally like deregulation advocates.
Yeah.
Modifying the weather has consequences. Like you should have licensing and regulation around this. You should scrutinize people's operations. You should be transparent about this. And so not only should there be these regulations at a state level everywhere, but currently weather modification is regulated under the Department of Commerce within NOAA. But it's a joke. To be totally transparent, it is a joke. There is a permitting portal where you just submit a notice of your intent to operate. And you can submit anything. Like some SRM companies have submitted their program area as the entire planet for 99 years, right? I'm pretty sure that when you submit one of these notices, it gets like sent into a paper shredder. If Doge wants to look into this, I'll text Luke about it. But like there's no appropriate federal regulatory regime right now.
And when you're applying in one of these states, how long does it take on average for a permit to come back?
Yeah. So in the case of Texas, nobody had submitted a new permit application for, I think, decades. And so when we submitted ours,
they like didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah, they were like, "There's what do we? Yeah,
who are you?"
Yeah, literally, it's like this is on the books. So and similarly in Florida, they have regulations dating back to 1953 on weather modification. They have a licensing structure and penalties if you infract on any of their regulations or operate without a permit, without a license. But it generally, where there are active operations, and Utah has really been leading the way in this, and Idaho has really been leading the way in this. Like they have very tech forward. Got to give it to the Mormons, man. They have very tech forward policymakers. They'll be a little bit faster. That's closer to 1 to 3 months. In some of these other places, the process takes 3 to 9.
Wow. 1 to 3 months being fast is like when you're trying to onboard a new customer,
Yes.
It's a bit of a bummer.
Yeah. I mean, my heart goes out to the people responsible for these operations because like they're radically under-resourced, right? Like it's nobody knows that these things exist. They don't know how to handle the permitting for the most part. But some time to scrutinize these things and make sure they're safe. Fair enough. 9 months is a pretty long time. That one's pretty tough.
Yeah. So paint the picture for us. Like, what is the future of this technology? Right now you can, you got a farmer that wants more water to increase, the amount he's able to produce and thus how much money he's able to make. But this seems to me like something that could fundamentally change America. Paint that picture.
Rainmaker's mission is to make Earth habitable. And that's a deliberately obscure sort of provocative phrase because it is habitable, right? Like we do live here already. But we don't live in what I think our mandate from Genesis 1:26 through 28 tells us to. Like we do not have stewardly dominion over the skies. And consequently, we suffer from droughts. We have all of this wasteland in the American Southwest and the Mojave and the Sonora. What we want to do is produce enough water, not just to maintain current ecosystems and maintain the biodiversity that we have, say, in the Colorado River Basin. It's not just about maintaining the amount of agriculture that we have in the Central Valley. What we want to do is we want to take, with caution and with discretion and with input from local constituencies, we want to take all of the non-arable land that we have. We want to take all of the cities that are currently suffering from lack of water supply and produce more water such that that land can become biodiverse and lush and green. And really, like the Midwest, the Great Plains, if not forests even higher in trophic level than that, it should extend throughout all of America. Like all of America should be green. All of it should be lush. All of it should be healthy and vibrant. That's the ultimate mission. And the way that we get there is, in a certain sense, not so complicated. We have these things called atmospheric rivers, right? An atmospheric river it's a river in the sky. It's what it sounds like.
I have no idea what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Explain it to me.
Yeah.
Explain it to me.
So most of the precipitation in the Midwest, it comes from these atmospheric rivers, these huge cloud formations over the Pacific that blow in, and they have tens of trillions of gallons of water in them. But they're super inefficient precipitators. Like about 1% of the water from them will precipitate, and you get about 10 of them per year, 10 to 20. If you just enhance that precipitation, if you just enhance the amount of water that's falling, because most of this water is not precipitating at all, it just gets recycled by the oceans. It is positive sum cloud seeding, by the way. Like you can make more rain fall down over productive areas rather than the ocean. Then you can green the West, and you can do it without some $1 trillion desalination project. So we start with what's called glaciogenic precipitation enhancement. We make cold clouds rain more. Rainmaker's actively doing research into what's called hygroscopic precipitation enhancement, making warm clouds rain more. And then eventually there's all different modes of weather modification. Hail is a huge problem, and that's something that should be solved for. Flooding is a huge problem, and that's something that should be solved for with other atmospheric engineering. But for now, our interest is producing more water, first to maintain ecosystems, second to maintain agricultural interests, and then eventually facilitate growth of the American West.
So yeah, bringing it down into a smaller level, what could, say, New Mexico look like if this were, like, I know it'll be green, but like what could it actually mean for industry in the state, average people?
Yeah,
and
totally.
So on.
So, I would say Gen Z's climate agenda, and I talked to Chris Bernard from the American Conservation Coalition about this kind of stuff. I talked to, Isaiah and others about this. Gen Z's vision for like climate activism, when you say that, you think like Greta Thunberg, like that super cringe, whatever. It's so much more abundant and pro-growth and exciting. Like what we should be doing is actively trying to steward the planet as best we can to make it as vibrant as possible. So in the case of New Mexico, like the cringe climate activists will talk about population carrying capacity, and they'll be like, there's too many people on the planet, blah, right? It's terrible. That's very anti-human. I don't support that. A very practical problem, though, is like if you have a fixed amount of water and groundwater and precipitation, like you can only farm so much. You can only have so many people. Like that's a real constraint on scarce resources. What you can do via cloud seeding, via precipitation enhancement is it's not like a miracle technology. Like we can't turn any desert into the Amazon rainforest, but you can certainly upgrade its trophic potential so that more people can live in Arizona, so that you can build out more cities and neighborhoods so that housing can become cheaper. So like in the case of Phoenix, housing prices are going up because you can't build as much as you ought to because there's not enough water to sustain that development. Food prices, right? Like we can make all of our crops in the United States much, much more affordable because we can turn all of this land that is currently wasteland into an agricultural asset, chips and data centers as well. This is another consideration. TSMC is building out Arizona right now. Well, data centers in take Eastern Oregon, for example, they use about a quarter of all the water in the eastern half of the state, which is insane.
Wow.
And demand is only going up. If you want to produce more agricultural land, if you want to drive the price of food down, both for Americans and all of the rest of the world that we supply, if you want these cities to grow, and if you want more housing development, if you want more data centers and chip fabs and other industry, then you need more water. And the only way that you can get that in places like New Mexico and Arizona and Colorado and Utah and Nevada and the Central Valley and the interior of California otherwise, you need cloud seeding. And that's ultimately what we aim to do.
Yeah, this is the sort of thing that I was very interested in talking about is making it rain leads to reindustrialization.
Yeah.
And even thinking about just at a more base level, like we import so many of our agricultural products. And if we could just like 3x, everything that we're doing, being able to make, America not just an agricultural superpower again, but also just being able to produce all these things in the United States.
Do you know about the Saudi water interests in Arizona?
So I think I've seen you post about some of this stuff, but explain it for the listeners anyway.
So through a series of shell corporations, Saudi companies and the government have bought up about a third of the groundwater assets in Arizona. And so they get water by right for free. They then use that water to grow alfalfa way below what it should cost because they just get the water for free. And then they send it all to Saudi, to cattle farms there. So our farmers, our cattlemen, our ranchers aren't benefiting from the water and subsequently the crop feed that could be serving them and reducing the price of their feed and reducing the price of the steak that we buy. Right. That's a crazy problem that is sort of a separate regulatory issue than cloud seeding, but more water leads to more supply for all of these things.
Yeah. You and I are both totally pro-growth people. I think one of the more tactical arguments for people who may not be institutionally pro-growth is what other countries think and do about cloud seeding and weather modification. Can you tell us the state of where some of these other countries are at?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's sort of three interesting examples to point to. So the first is Southeast Asia looks into weather modification heavily. There's something called the Thai Royal Rainmaking Department.
That sounds sick as hell.
Awesome, right? I know. Their seal is very cool. The awards that they give are very cool. Rainmaker hopes to earn one soon. But they do both precipitation enhancement for agricultural interests and also to keep the soil moist so that there's no flooding from dry ground.
Yeah, because like the rainy and the dry season thing.
Exactly. And so Indonesia also looks into this heavily. Malaysia and Singapore also look into this. They've got programs going on, and I applaud them for continuing to drive this down. They're not the most sophisticated in the world yet, but they do have this interest. And it's interesting because they're in Southeast Asia with neighbors just north of them that I'll talk about in a moment. Then there's the ones that people have largely heard about in media, Saudi and the UAE. So the UAE and Saudi, they're interested in this because they live in a desert. They have no water. It is immediately very apparent to them what the utility of cloud seeding is because they live in a wasteland that they want to terraform. There's something called the Dubai 2040 Green Initiative. They intend to turn a third of the Emirate of Dubai green by 2040. Extraordinarily ambitious terraforming project. That's awesome. We should do things like that. And we used to do things like that, by the way, like the California Water Supply Project. It turned the Central Valley, which is now our most productive agricultural asset and the most productive in the world, from swamps and desert into like the best farmland ever. So we used to build infrastructure like that. We used to build the Hoover Dam that all of these Western cities rely on. And Dubai and the Saudis are interested in this sort of thing too. They have a more sophisticated operation. I think that the implementation of drones and better validation or attribution tech will be instrumental for their programs. But the real thing that we should be thinking about is China. And, I'm not like an insane China hawk, but I think very practically when China is investing $300 million per year in a technology like weather modification, when they have a Beijing Weather Modification Bureau, when they have 40,000 people employed throughout the country doing weather modification, and when they have 2 universities that have degree programs specifically in weather engineering for these weather modification programs, we should be taking that very seriously. Like the United States is forecasted to lose 1 million square miles of green arable land to desert in the next 15 years. China has greened in the last 30 years 2 million square miles, and they're doing 500,000 or 5,000 miles, 5,000 square miles per year in addition to that, because cloud seeding is providing more water to these arid regions. If we don't invest in cloud seeding, if we don't invest in this whole technology tree, and obviously this is me talking my own book, but like as an American, I think it's talking in our collective interest. If we don't have control of this technology, then it's the CCP that gets to modify the weather
Right.
where they please.
And I'm assuming that it's the Gobi Desert, right? Like, what's their application for it?
They have an array of things. So greening the Gobi Desert, greening Inner Mongolia, there's that. The Three Gorges Dam, they supply a lot of the water in that watershed via weather modification and cloud seeding. The Tibetan Plateau that water runs off into the rest of the country from, they have active precipitation enhancement operations. Like the entire country is an active operational and experimentation zone for weather modification.
Yeah. Bringing up the dam, that's actually interesting. I had not thought about this application. Is there a sense in which you could use this to power like hydro and solve some of the grid problems?
Yeah. Oh, exactly. So the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is the biggest hydroelectric operator in the United States. Then the Bureau of Reclamation as well within DOI, another huge operator of hydroelectric assets. If you want to produce not only more clean water, but more clean energy, right? Like I think that long-term nuclear is going to be the solution, but why would we pass up on supplying more water to these perfectly clean, perfectly renewable assets that we have distributed all over the United States? That is something that cloud seeding immediately can provide for.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think it was very interesting that you brought up Genesis earlier. You and I have had a number of conversations about this, but it was a really good speech by the vice president. I think it was 2 weeks ago at the A16Z summit they had here in DC, about sort of the marriage of this coalition between pro-growth tech people and then traditional conservatives. And both of these groups were big supporters of the president's ticket. How do you see your role as a Christian, as a tech founder, and how that should impact our country?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first as a caveat, I'll say just to clarify something on Moment of Truth, the American Moment podcast. Water is bipartisan. Even if we're here in DC right now, whether you care about environmental interests in California or Colorado or farming interests in Utah or Idaho, like everybody needs water. So I'll say that for openers, and cloud seeding can provide that water no matter who or where you are, and it can provide it safely and cleanly. With respect to the marriage of faith and tech, there's a great book called Bubbles. I think Bubbles, Boom and the End of Stagnation. It's by Tobias Huber. Totally recommend you or anybody listening reads it. And it's about how the technologists of the 60s, they all had these transcendent, divinely inspired missions, right? And you have to be very wary when you believe that you are doing something for the kingdom, for the service of God, because I think that people develop hubris that way. But what I will say is our technology, our economy, our political discourse, it has largely consisted of totally material interests and totally material narratives for the last many decades. Like people talk about GDP growth for the sake of GDP growth. People talk about SaaS products and their incredible margins. And while that's all well and good and maybe a fine proximate indicator of some kind of progress and benefit, Rainmaker was really inspired by like my interest in serving God through the highest leverage means that I could and building the kingdom on earth. And by using this technology that doesn't currently exist in any meaningful form, I think that we can steward creation as God intended us to. And this is like pre-fall, by the way. First commandment we were ever given was to take care of the garden. All of this is his creation. All of this should be tended to. If we do forest management, if we build dams to prevent floods, just the same, we should manage our atmospheric resources and that part of creation. And so I think that technologists have a unique burden on them, as do policymakers in a different way, to bring about a future that serves, yes, our material interests, but much more importantly, like bring about the kingdom of God on earth. And that's what I intend to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose the point that I'm kind of driving toward here is regardless of whether it's your tradition or not, innovation, taking dominion, fundamentally Christian.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Like, you know, I don't think that Galileo Galilei was at odds with the church just because he was looking into how our solar system actually works, right? Like discovering how God's creation works and better serving it because of the technology and the science that we have. Like that is a fundamentally Christian premise.
Yeah. I'm sure there are some people in state legislatures that are, opposing the weather modification stuff because they view it as, only God has the right to make it rain.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that's not the case?
It's interesting because I'll bring up an example, which is like, we've cut down forests in order to produce farmland or in order to build cities, and that's all reasonable. And even more than reasonable, it's good, right? Because we've modified creation to both serve its and our interest. And I'll make that analogy to weather modification and say, well, we're just modifying this other part of creation for creation in our interest. Something about the sky and the heavens and looking up makes people a little bit more squeamish, which I understand. But it says specifically in Genesis 26 in Genesis 1:26, excuse me, that like we're told to take dominion over the earth, which, okay, the ground, we've got a relatively solid grasp on that. Like we build cities and dams and that kind of thing. And then the skies and the seas. We don't do anything about those, right? Like maybe we have some dams and levees in New Orleans, but that's it. We have totally abdicated our responsibility to God to take care of this part of his creation. And I think that if we do it in a cautious and responsible and prayerful manner, I hope to stand before him in the next life with him being pleased for the work that I put in.
Yeah. And I will note that in the King James Version, it says, and everything therein. And everything therein. The oceans, the seas, all of the above.
Amen.
Well, Augustus, this was awesome. Really enjoyed this conversation. Where can people keep up with all the insane things you post on Twitter, the amazing work that you're doing at Rainmaker, and keep up with all the success that you guys are going to have?
Yeah, rainmaker.com. So RAINMAKER.com. That is our corporate website. If you are interested in working to make Earth habitable and stewarding creation, then we're actively hiring all sorts of engineering and non-technical roles. And then on X.com, my handle is Doricko, Doricko.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Hope to have you back in like a year or two, and we're doing this everywhere, man.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Moment of Truth. Again, that was Augustus Doricko, the CEO of Rainmaker. He plugged his information as to where you can follow him on X. Again, as a personal recommendation, I would highly recommend you do that. It's very entertaining, and you'll learn a lot. As always, you guys rating and reviewing the podcast, giving us 5-star ratings, talking about how great this show is, helps us to attract more interesting guests like Augustus. So please do that. Please give us great ratings and reviews. You can find us on X.com, Instagram, Meta. Do they still call it Facebook? I don't know, but it's at ammoment.org on all of our platforms online. You can find out more information about us there and on our website at americanmoment.org. Thank you, and we will see you next week. Moment of Truth is an American Moment podcast taped at the Conservative Partnership Campus Studios and is produced by Jake Mercier and Hunter Smith, with original graphics and title cards by Jared Cummings. Our intro song is A Minor Struggle by Ryan Serenich, and our website is americanmoment.org.